Sales of newly built houses are declining, especially in southern states, which are really starting to struggle, and where the majority of these newly constructed houses are located. Home buyers are disappearing, and so inventories are building up faster than builders can handle them. In fact, 2/3 of builders say they have to offer incentives just to try to clear the inventory, and more than 1/3 of them say they're cutting prices. We're also seeing a record number of home buyers cancel their purchase contracts, which means the entire national housing market is really at a tipping point. New home sales are down, existing home sales rebounded in July, but not meaningfully and remain severely depressed, and in both segments, new and existing homes, prices are teetering. The median for new builds was significantly lower last month, and now for resales, price gains completely evaporated in July, which is one of the peak months for the entire marketplace. There are more sellers in all categories than buyers. According to the National Association of Realtors chief economist, this doesn't make any sense. Buying conditions in real estate are, according to Dr. Yun, the most favorable they've been since 2020. Buyers should be out in droves. Where is everybody? Quite simply, the stock market does not speak for the economy. Shares are soaring, yet consumers are depressed in far more ways than strictly sentiment. We keep seeing these signs of a macro-led housing bust. And it's not just one thing or another, it's basically everywhere from whatever angle you want to analyze, whether it be developers, new home sales, existing home sales, buyers, contracts, prices, you name it. Starting with new home sales, the latest data that came out just today, according to the Census Bureau. New home sales totaled 652,000 seasonally adjusted annual rate in July, which was down slightly from an upward revised total in June. But that's 8.2% below the pace in July of 2024 and well below the 700,000 sold in July of 2023. And as I said in the introduction, sales dropped sharply in the South, down 3% to just 388,000 against seasonally adjusted annual rate. And southern states are by far the biggest region for new construction and building. Even though sales rose nearly 12% in the West, at least in this month, there are much less than half the number of builds out there, so it's really about the South and the southern home building market. Now, the number of unsold units across the entire country dipped very slightly, just by 0.6% to 499,000 units, which is still basically the highest since 2007. So with more sellers and more homes available and less buyers, the median sales price slid to $403,800. Down 2.1% from June and almost 6% below last July's median. So why is the housing market so drastically depressed? Why hasn't there been a sparking a turnaround? Because there was no recovery. This goes back to the original problem that we've been dealing with in the 2020s. The price illusion was all a lie. Everybody built homes and everybody built the economy and economic expectations on the idea that there would be a recovery. And now we keep seeing over and over again in all these places, there never was. So when you're making homes for a recovery that didn't happen, it's just another example of how the economy worldwide in the US still has to pay for the pandemic and the lockdowns and all of these various ways you don't normally think about. Jobs are being lost, and homes that look like easy money a few years ago, they're not getting sold. Instead, they're depressing prices and more economic activity at the margins along with it. This whole growing real estate bust is entirely about macroeconomics rather than credit creation like the last one. Everyone bought the recovery fantasy, and now there's no way to hide from reality as both home buyers as workers and home builders realize there isn't nearly enough income and income opportunities to even clear out the activity that's been done up to this point, let alone to support the market moving forward with new activity and new buying and new selling and new construction. There was no economy, and we're paying for it in all of these ways, including what looks to be more and more a macro-led housing bust. As we continue to talk about all of the downside possibilities that continue to pile up here in 2025, it makes perfect sense, therefore, to own gold. But gold, as a great store of value and error hedge, is still missing something. It's missing something big, and it's what we talk about all the time here at Eurodollar University. What it's missing is the ability to use it, to go back to where it was a long time ago, as both a store of value as well as a medium of exchange. And that's where Glint comes in. They're actually working to solve this major problem, to make gold useful again. Not just a great error hedge, but something that you can actually spend. This is allocated physical gold stored in a secure Brinks vault. It's fully insured, it's fully yours. With Glint, you can buy gold, you can save it, and you can spend it almost anywhere MasterCard is accepted. At the grocery store, for airline tickets, at the steakhouse, online shopping, it doesn't matter. You swipe and a fraction of your gold is sold in real time. You still own the gold until the moment it's used. No middleman, no IOUs, no derivatives. This is gold as money again. So go to your favorite app store and download the Glint Pay app and use referral code SNIDER so they know that I sent you, and see how they're rebuilding money and rebuilding trust in money 1 gram at a time. Again, that's Glint Pay in the app store. Use referral code SNIDER. And now let's get back to our video. As Bloomberg reported earlier this morning, while sales top projections, the new home market has grown dependent upon price cuts and incentives to entice customers amid, well, they claim high mortgage rates. What everybody says, because that's what mainstream economics gets you to believe. It's really about jobs and incomes and fears over future jobs and lack of incomes. The share of builders who reported using sales incentives reached a post-pandemic high of 66% this month as they seek to unload an inventory of completed homes at the highest level since 2009. Quote, home builders are bloated with inventories, a growing share of which are completed units. We expect inventories and elevated mortgage rates, again, they're not elevated mortgage rates, to weigh on housing market activity and home prices in the months ahead. And that's just the imbalance between sellers and buyers. But it's not about high mortgage rates. Mortgage rates have been sideways to lower for almost 2 years now. The entire economy has had 2 years to get used to mortgage rates at this level and moving lower. And it hasn't. The reason that home builders continue to have to offer discounts and incentives is because jobs aren't what they were supposed to be and incomes are being threatened moving forward. Those are the categories, those are the factors that have changed, not mortgage rates. As Bloomberg reported a week ago, the report from the National Association of Home Builders showed contractors are having to increase their already liberal use of sweeteners. The share of builders using sales incentives climbed to a post-pandemic high of 66% this month, which we already said, while an elevated 37% reported outright cutting prices. It's just the simple economics. No buyers, or the buyers that everyone thought they were going to be there, aren't there. And the reason they're not there is because of the labor market and the real economy and conditions in it, not because of mortgage rates. But since our commentary is derived from economists who believe everything revolves around mortgage rates, especially for those that are determined by the Federal Reserve when they're actually not, we're supposed to believe this is all about high mortgage rates when it's about the economy that economists don't see. At least they didn't until the payroll report and then last week with Jackson Hole. Economists didn't see the labor market as weak, and so therefore they didn't consider a factor. They do now, though. So the same problems that we're getting in new home sales go double for existing home sales or resales. For July, the resale transaction amount rose, but it was by a negligible amount. Having dropped under a 4 million season-adjusted annual rate in June, transaction volume moved back up, but only right back to 4 million. In fact, at 4.01 million. And while it's 2% higher than last July, there's no meaningful difference in sales at these low levels, as you can clearly see. And it's more than equal to the bottom of the big housing bust from a decade and a half ago. And just like with new homes, prices for existing homes are coming under pressure because there are more sellers these days than there are buyers, when buyers are supposed to be coming out in droves thanks to the solid labor market that everyone said up until recently was incredibly solid and steady. So while the overall median sales price was higher this July compared to last July, it was barely higher. In fact, it was basically even, up just 0.24%. So basically no price growth for what is one of the peak months for the entire calendar, the entire housing market calendar. That's a big deal, and it's indicative of a big change on the buying side and not due to interest rates. You can clearly see on the chart for median home sales and the slowing down, the rapid deceleration in the year-over-year change in median home sales, That this is something that has developed this year, consistent with all of the evidence and all of the indications showing a big pullback among consumers. And a big pullback among consumers in terms of consumer spending. They're also going to be cautious about buying big things like new homes or existing homes. But according to the National Association of Realtors and our old friend Dr. Larry Young, their chief economist, near zero growth in home prices suggests that roughly half the country is experiencing price reductions. That's not good. Overall, Young continued, homeowners are doing well financially. Only 2% of sales were foreclosures or short sales, essentially a historic low. And he's right about that. The market's health, Young claims, is supported by a cumulative 49% home price appreciation for a typical American homeowner from pre-COVID July 2019 to July this year. And while he's technically right about some of those things, homeowners are only doing well financially in the respect they aren't being hugely pressured by mortgage payments. Right now, that's the least of anyone's problems, though mortgage delinquencies have been ticking higher since last year. But none of this is the problem that we're talking about. It's the lack of jobs and the perceptions of a lack of jobs and the increasingly solidified perceptions of those. It's going to get worse ahead. That's why the housing market has changed here in 2025. And that's why you see the price changes, especially in resales, slow down to the point that they're now basically flat. And in that situation, as Yun said, market's health being supported by 49% home price appreciation from the bubble 4 years ago, that's only a somewhat protection against foreclosure. But on the other side, it is the primary source of difficulties, the affordability crisis everyone talks about, because the real key here is the lack of incomes that were nowhere near enough to keep up with those prices, those price gains in the real economy, let alone price gains in housing. Incomes have fallen behind and they're not coming back. And homeowners and prospective homeowners and home buyers, they know it. That's why they're staying home. If this is the best position from home buyers in 5 years where they can negotiate prices and all the stuff that Jan was talking about, where the hell are they? The fact that they're staying home tells you that something is preventing them from taking advantage of what Dr. Yun says is the most favorable conditions in the home market we've seen in a long time. So the fact that they aren't showing up is proof of exactly what I'm telling you. That home buyers are staying home despite all these favorable conditions because something else is more unfavorable. Something else more important is not in their favor. If buyers have everything going for them, from solid wage growth, as Jan always claims, to a buyer's market, prices behaving more favorably, not to mention economic sentiment that's supposed to be sky high with trade deals and a record high soaring stock market, why aren't home buyers flooding the market desperate to take advantage of all these favorable factors? The question answers itself. Americans are in no mood to buy a house, no matter what the National Association of Realtors says about how it's a great time to do it. Workers know. First of all, the incomes they have aren't nearly enough. And then second, more important, job cutting is getting started. And while the mainstream totally ignores this, or at least it did before the last jobs report, workers know the employment situation is beyond precarious. In fact, according to a report from a couple days ago, Redfin said that home buyers are more likely to cancel their contracts now than ever before. What Redfin said was 15% of home purchases fell through last month, the highest July rate on record, as high home buying costs made buyers skittish. And cancellations, going back to the South, are most common in Texas and Florida. Roughly 58,000 U.S. home purchase agreements were canceled in July, equal to 15.3% of homes that went under contract last month. That's up from 14.5% a year earlier and marks the highest July rate in records dating back to 2017. And they claim that home purchases are falling through more than usual because high prices, high mortgage rates, and get this, economic uncertainty are making buyers uneasy. Buyers also have more homes to choose from than in the past, which means they hold the negotiating power in many markets and often aren't in a rush. And this is July. Uncertainty was supposed to be 3 months ago. It's the economy, the marketplace, the labor situation is getting more certain, not less. That's why home buyers aren't buying. They're increasingly convinced there is big trouble ahead, and they don't want to get saddled with an enormous expense that sounded good when they signed the contract. Contrary to all these claims about high interest rates have not changed. What has is the consumer economy driven by big changes, meaningful changes, the flat part of the beverage curve lying ahead of us. It's employment, jobs, incomes, and perception of those up ahead. Consumers are saying in all these different ways, including canceling contracts and not buying houses to begin with, what they're seeing up ahead is now what Jay Powell is beginning to see himself. So with all these problems in new home sales in particular, it's going to be an issue for home construction, which just adds another layer to the economic malaise here. Going back to the previous article we talked about from Bloomberg, Stephen Stanley, who's the chief economist at Santander Capital Markets, said, the slowdown in construction activity is starting to help at the margin, not really, as the number of new homes for sale that are under construction dropped. So this is hopeful, but until it translates into the drop in the number of completed new homes for sale, builders are still likely to regard cutting construction as an urgent priority. And indeed, the latest data from the Census Bureau on home construction shows that's absolutely the case. The total number of permits that were filed in the month of July to build residential units of all types, so that's single family as well as multifamily, that slid to 1.36 million seasonally adjusted annual rate, which is the lowest since June of 2020. And in December of 2021, just to give you some context, the number of permits filed were more than 1.9 million, which was the height of the price illusion recovery live bubble. So from 1.9 million all the way down under 1.4 million. And just a couple of years ago, in fact, 18 months ago, at the height of the interest rate craze, there were 1.53 million permits filed in October 2023 at the top. So ever since then, interest rates and mortgage rates in the marketplace have been moving lower, yet there's been no turnaround in home building or home buying, which has gotten weaker ever since. So say it with me, low rates are a reflection of economic weakness, not the answer to it. In the latest data, single-family permits managed a small increase from June into July, rising to 875,000 season-adjusted annual rate. But along with June, those were the lowest levels since early 2023, when the real estate sector was coming off the sharp rise in interest and mortgage rates. So builders are cutting back because there's too much supply already, and there's too much supply because there aren't enough jobs and incomes to support all of this. Everyone was expecting a real recovery that just never showed up. The economy instead forgot how to grow and has been unable to remember, even as rates have generally moved downward. Again, that's why rates move lower, as a reflection of real fundamentals that are consistent with lack of growth, and more so lack of growth potential. So this imbalance between buyers and sellers, with fewer buyers and too much that are being sold, reflects the economics of the situation that we find ourselves in. The recovery was a lie, and we've got to pay for it in all these various ways. And now home builders, as well as the housing market overall, is paying for it in lower prices, the simple economic consequence from too many sellers and not nearly enough buyers. And there's not nearly enough buyers because there's not nearly enough income. And there's not nearly enough income because there's not nearly enough work. And there's not nearly enough work because the recovery was all a lie. It's taken several years to get to this point. And now more and more it looks like the housing market is ready to experience a macro-led bust, not a crash. We're not seeing a mortgage-type crash like in 2007 and 2008, but a housing bust that adds more difficult challenges to an already challenging macroeconomic environment. I mean, to begin with, banks that are able to make as much profit off the limited mortgage opportunities they're going to be getting, they're not going to be in the mood to lend in other riskier areas like consumer or even corporate credit. Mortgages are a slam dunk for banks. But if there aren't enough qualified buyers, and if the few who are qualified are more concerned about losing their job, the banking system loses one of its easiest and most reliable profit centers. Doubly so if this macro-led housing bust does lead to more delinquencies, and those already have been creeping higher. That's one thing that banks really, and I mean really, don't want to see. The mortgage market has been totally quiet and stable, while banks have had to navigate volatility and craziness in the other bigger segments like corporate credit. They sure as hell don't need to be spending time, resources, and money on a bust over here in the property market. But there are also negative feedbacks in the real economy, mainly related to consumers, as you'd expect. Consumers have already pulled back, which is reflected in the weakness all across real estate. But now additional weakness in homes, maybe even falling home values beyond Florida and Texas, convinces consumers to pull back on spending even more. Though nobody at the Federal Reserve has mentioned housing recently, even a modest bust in real estate is just one more reason for interest rates to go down. As you'll notice, that's where all roads are leading. That's kind of what Jay Powell said at Jackson Hole last week. He said, well, yeah, we thought tariff inflation, now we think something different. Went over all those details in the video link below. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Huge thank you, Eurodollar University members and subscribers. And until next time, please do take care.